He planned to divorce me in 6 months. I recorded every word, found 2 women he had done it to before, and put him in front of a judge before our wedding. Flowers had even died. If this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next will absolutely stun you. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. My name is Grace Montgomery, and I want to tell you something before I even begin this story. I was not a naive woman. I was 53 years old when I married Trevor Callahan. I had lived a full life. I had raised 2 children mostly on my own after my first marriage ended quietly, without drama, without betrayal, just 2 people who had grown in different directions. I had worked as a school librarian for 26 years. I had buried my father, cared for my mother through her hip surgery, and survived the kind of loneliness that settles into a person's bones after the kids leave home and the house goes quiet in a way that feels permanent. I say all of this because I want you to understand something. I was not the kind of woman who falls for just anything. I was not desperate. I was not naive, and I was not blind. Or so I thought. Trevor came into my life 3 years before that wedding night. He walked into the library on a Tuesday afternoon in October, carrying a canvas tote bag and asking about local history books. He was 61, recently retired from a career in commercial real estate, and he had the kind of easy smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We talked for 45 minutes about a book on the history of our county that I had personally cataloged. He came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. By December, we were having coffee. By February, dinner. By the following spring, I knew I was in love with him in a way I hadn't felt since I was in my 30s. "You make me feel young again," he told me once, sitting across from me at a little Italian place we'd made our regular spot. "You make me feel like everything is still possible." I believed him. I held on to those words like they were gospel. I should have paid more attention to what he didn't say. The engagement came 18 months later. It was simple and private, just the 2 of us on the back porch of his house a Sunday evening, a glass of wine and a small ring box he produced from his jacket pocket. No grand gesture, no kneeling. He just held it out to me and said, "I don't want to waste any more time, Grace. I want you to be my wife." I said yes before he finished the sentence. My daughter Renee was cautious. She was 32, practical a nurse, and she had a way of looking at a situation that stripped away all the romance and got right to the bone. "Mom," she said when I told her on the phone, "how well do you really know him?" 3 years, Renee." "That's not what I asked." I remember feeling a flash of irritation. "He's a good man. He's kind, he's stable, he's good to me." There was a pause on her end. "Has he introduced you to his friends? His family?" And I told her yes, of course, but even as I said it, something small and quiet moved through me. Because the truth was, I had met a few of his former colleagues at a retirement dinner. I had spoken once to his brother on the phone briefly. His parents were gone. He had no children. His social circle was, by his own description, small and intentional. "I don't need a lot of people," he had told me. "I just need the right ones." At the time, I found that romantic. Standing there on the phone with my daughter asking careful questions, it felt a little different. But love has a way of smoothing things over. And I was so happy. I had not been that happy in so long. I let the question pass. Jasmine Whitaker had been my best friend for 19 years. We had met at a neighborhood association meeting of all places, both of us annoyed about a proposed parking ordinance, and we had ended up laughing about it in the parking lot afterward for 20 minutes. She was 4 years younger than me, recently divorced herself at that point, sharp and funny and loyal in the way that truly matters. The kind of loyal that shows up when your world falls apart, not just when things are good. She was my maid of honor. She helped me pick the dress. She sat with me through 3 fittings and 2 alterations, telling me I looked beautiful even when I couldn't see it myself. She organized the bridal shower. She made the toast at the rehearsal dinner that had half the room crying and the other half laughing. She was, I believed, the person who knew me best in the world, outside of my own children. That belief would later become the sharpest part of the wound. The wedding itself was small, exactly the way I wanted it. 60 people. A venue overlooking the river. Late September, the weather impossibly perfect. Renee walked me down the aisle because I asked her to, and my son Daniel flew in from Portland and sat in the front row with his wife. And when I looked at Trevor standing at the altar waiting for me, I felt a wave of pure, uncomplicated joy that I want you to understand was real. Whatever else was happening that I didn't yet know what I felt in that moment was real. We said our vows. We kissed. We danced to a song we had picked together, a slow, old thing neither of us could remember the first time we'd heard. We cut the cake. We laughed and toasted and said goodbye to our guests in the warm evening air. By 9:30, we were in the honeymoon suite of the hotel where the reception had been held. It was a beautiful room. I will not pretend otherwise. Flowers on every surface. A bottle of champagne in a bucket of ice. The kind of room that is designed to make you feel like the most important people in the world. Trevor ordered room service, just strawberries and chocolate, a small indulgence, and we sat together on the edge of the bed and talked quietly and laughed about little things from the day. He was relaxed in a way I hadn't seen him all evening. The tension of the ceremony had left him. He was warm present mine. At 11:15 he got a phone call. He looked at the screen. Something crossed his face, something quick, something he smoothed over immediately, and he said, "I have to take this business thing, won't be a minute." He stepped into the bathroom and closed the door. I sat on the bed and poured myself a small glass of champagne and waited. He came out 6 minutes later, and something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that would have alarmed most people, but I knew Trevor's face. I had been reading it for 3 years. There was a tightness around his eyes, a deliberateness to his movements, the particular stillness of a person who is managing something internal. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said, smiling. "Just a loose end on a property deal, nothing that can't wait." "On our wedding night." He laughed, and it was almost convincing. "You know how it is. Money doesn't take a honeymoon." I laughed too, because what else do you do? Sat. At 11:30, he kissed my forehead and told me he needed some air. "Just a few minutes," he said. "I get these headaches when I'm stressed. Fresh air always helps." "Do you want me to come with you?" No. He squeezed my hand. "Stay here. Rest. I'll be back before you know it." He walked out the door. I sat on the bed, still in my wedding nightgown, ivory silk, a gift from Jasmine, actually, and I poured the rest of my champagne, and I told myself this was nothing. This was just Trevor being Trevor. The man was a worrier. He had always had trouble fully relaxing. The wedding had been a big day. He just needed a few minutes to decompress. I waited. Midnight came. I got up and walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot below, half expecting to see him standing there, maybe on the phone again, maybe just breathing in the night air the way he said. The lot was quiet. A few cars, a light in a window across the way. No Trevor. I told myself to lie down. I told myself he'd be back any moment. I picked up my phone and almost called him, then put it down, feeling silly, feeling like a woman who couldn't give her new husband 20 minutes to himself on a stressful night. And then I heard the laughter. It came from down the hall. A woman's laughter, high and light, followed by a man's lower, quieter but unmistakable. I knew that laugh. I had heard it 10,000 times across dinner tables and backyard patios and the inside of cars on long drives. I had heard it in hospital waiting rooms and at my children's school plays and at the tail end of long phone calls that stretched past midnight. That was Trevor's laugh. And the woman laughing with him, I knew her too. I stood completely still in the center of that beautiful room, and for a moment I could not move. My body simply refused. My mind was already moving, already calculating, already pulling at threads I had never wanted to pull, but my body just stood there, in the ivory silk nightgown with the champagne glass in my hand, and for 5 long seconds I was absolutely nowhere. Then something in me shifted, something cold and clear and very, very quiet. I set the glass down. I walked to the door. I opened it without making a sound. The hallway stretched out in front of me, low lit the carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps. I could still hear them, not words yet, just sound muffled and warm and wrong in every possible way. Two people laughing together in a hotel hallway past midnight, while one of them had a wife waiting alone in a honeymoon suite 40 feet away. My feet were bare. I had not thought to put on shoes. I had not thought about anything except the sound. I walked toward it. The closer I got, the more the laughter sharpened into something I could parse Trevor saying something I couldn't quite make out yet. A response from her, another soft laugh, the particular back-and-forth cadence of people who are completely comfortable with each other. Completely at ease. Not the sound of two people having a chance encounter in a hallway. The sound of two people who were exactly where they had planned to be. I stopped outside a door near the end of the hall, room 412. The laughter was coming from inside. The door was not fully closed. There was a half-inch gap. The latch not quite caught the light from inside, cutting a thin line across the carpet at my feet. I stood there for a moment. I want to be honest with you. Standing in that hallway, I had a choice. I knew I had a choice. I could walk back to my room. I could pour another glass of champagne. I could lie down. I could tell myself whatever I needed to tell myself, and in the morning I could ask Trevor about the phone call and the late-night walk and let him explain it in whatever way he chose to explain it. I could have done that. Instead, I pressed my back against the wall just beside the door, and I listened. "You were incredible today, by the way," I heard her say. "Absolutely incredible. I don't know how you kept a straight face through the whole thing." His voice low and easy. "Practice." She laughed again. That laugh, Jasmine's laugh. "Practice. You are something else, Trevor Callahan. You're not exactly innocent here." "I know." A pause, the sound of something being set down on a surface. I keep thinking about her face. During the vows, she looked so... Don't." His voice sharpened slightly. "Don't do that. We agreed." I know. I'm not backing out. I'm just saying." "Jasmine." His voice dropped lower, and I had to strain to hear it. "We are 6 months away. That's it. 6 months. We stay the course, we do what we planned, and then it's over. All of it." 6 months. I felt the words land in my chest like something physical, like a door slamming in a very quiet room. "I know," she said softer now. "I know. I just miss you. I've missed you all day, and you were right there, and I couldn't—" "I know." His voice changed again, gentler now, and that gentleness, the gentleness I recognized, the gentleness I had believed was mine, was the worst part. "I know, me too, but this is almost done. We're almost there. Almost done." I stood with my back against that wall in my ivory silk nightgown on my wedding night, and I understood with absolute clarity that my marriage had been over before it began. That the man I had said I do to 4 hours ago had planned in advance with my best friend to end it. That the wedding, the flowers, the vows, the dance, all of it had been a performance, a very careful, very deliberate performance, and I was the only one in the audience who hadn't known it was a show. Here's the thing about a certain kind of shock. It doesn't make you loud, it doesn't make you dramatic, it doesn't make you burst through doors and throw things and scream in the hallway until the other guests call the front desk. That is what they expected, I think. If they thought about what would happen if I found out, and I believe standing there that they had thought about it at least in passing, they expected the version of a woman in crisis that looks like chaos. They expected tears and accusations, and the kind of scene that could later be described as hysterical, unstable, impossible to reason with. What they got was nothing, because I was not going to give them the satisfaction. I stood in that hallway for one more full minute, listening, cataloging, memorizing. And then I did something that I have never fully been able to explain even to myself. I reached into the small pocket of my nightgown. I always have a pocket. It is the one fashion, non-negotiable I have maintained since 1987, and I took out my phone. And I pressed record. I held it close to the gap in the door, my hand steady in a way that my heart absolutely was not, and I let it run. Trevor said, "Does she suspect anything?" Jasmine said, "Grace, no. She trusts me completely. That's the thing about Grace. She always assumes the best about the people she loves. She never questions." Trevor was quiet for a moment. Then That's actually what I love about her. Another pause. Loved. What I loved about her. I heard Jasmine say softly, "Trevor." And he said, I know. It's just, never mind. 6 months. That's the plan." 6 months, she repeated like a confirmation, like a promise. I lowered my phone. I looked down at the screen. The recording timer was still running. I watched it for a moment, 4:17, 4:18, 4:19, and then I stopped it. Pressed. Save sent the file immediately to my personal email as a backup and slipped the phone back into my pocket. And then I walked back down the hallway into the honeymoon suite, closed the door behind me without making a sound, and sat down on the edge of the bed. The champagne was flat by now. The strawberries were room temperature. The flowers were still beautiful, row after row of white roses filling the room with their smell, and I sat in the middle of all of it, and I thought about 19 years of friendship. I thought about 3 years of love, or what I had called love, what I had experienced as love, whatever it actually was. I thought about a wedding dress that had taken 3 fittings and 2 alterations. I thought about vows I had meant with my whole heart, and I thought about 6 months, a countdown I had known nothing about running in the background of my marriage before the wedding cake had even been cut. My phone buzzed. A text from Trevor. "Getting some air, be back soon. Don't wait up. Sleep, my love. My love." I stared at those 2 words for a very long time. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled to a name I hadn't called in several years, Patricia Greer, family law attorney, someone I had known since our children were in school together, and I opened a new text and typed 4 words. "I need your help." I sent it and set the phone face down on the nightstand. Then I lay back against the pillows, surrounded by his white roses in the hotel room that was supposed to be the beginning of something, and I closed my eyes. I did not sleep, but I was no longer afraid. Because the thing about knowing the truth, even the worst truth, even the truth that takes everything you thought you had and turns it over like a table, is that it gives you something the lie never could. It gives you ground to stand on, and I intended to stand. Trevor came back to the room at 12:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock on the nightstand, the way you watch something when you need to stay anchored to something real. The door opened quietly. He was trying not to wake me, I realized. He believed I was asleep. He believed I had done exactly what his text told me to do, sleep, my love. And because he believed I was the Grace he had always known, trusting, never questioning, always assuming the best, he had no reason to think otherwise. I heard him set his keycard on the dresser. I heard him exhale long and slow, the way a person exhales when they have been holding tension in their body for hours and finally feel safe enough to let it go. I heard him sit down on the small chair near the window to take off his shoes. I lay completely still, eyes closed, breathing even. He was careful. I will give him that. He moved through that room like a man who had practiced not disturbing the person sleeping in it. And maybe that should have told me something too in a different time, in a different version of this story. But I wasn't thinking about what it told me. I was thinking about the recording on my phone and the text I had sent to Patricia Greer and the 4 hours between now and when I intended to make my first move. He slid into the bed beside me. After a moment, he put his hand on my shoulder gently, the way you touch something fragile, and said almost in a whisper, "Good night, Grace." I did not move. "Good night," I said quietly, and I made my voice sound thick with sleep. He settled. His breathing slowed within minutes, and I lay there in the dark, with my eyes open, listening to my husband sleep on our wedding night, and I made a list in my head of everything I needed to do. By the time the room began to lighten, I had the list memorized. I was up before 6. Trevor was still asleep. I dressed quickly and quietly in the bathroom, took my phone, took my small clutch purse with my ID, and 1 credit card I kept separately in my name. Only a habit from my first marriage, one of the few practical lessons that had stayed with me, and I walked out of the honeymoon suite and closed the door behind me. I took the elevator to the lobby. I found a quiet corner near the window. I called Patricia Greer. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice alert, in a way that told me she had already seen my late-night text and been thinking about it. "Grace, talk to me." So I talked. I told her everything. The phone call at 11:15, the laughter in the hallway, the conversation through the door, the recording, 6 months, the plan, Jasmine. All of it delivered in the flattest, most matter-of-fact voice I could manage, because if I let any emotion into it, I was going to fall apart, and I did not have time to fall apart. Patricia was quiet through most of it. When I finished, she said, "You recorded the conversation." "Yes." "And you sent it to your personal email?" "Immediately." A brief pause. "Grace, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not confront him yet. Do not let him know you know anything. Can you do that?" I looked down at my hands. They were steadier than I expected. "I already did it once. I can do it again." "Good. I need you to meet me Monday morning, first thing. We're going to move fast on this, but we need to move smart. Understand?" "Understood." "And Grace," her voice softened just slightly, "I'm so sorry." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you, Patricia." I hung up. I sat there for another moment watching the early morning light come through the lobby windows, and I thought about what Jasmine had said. She always assumes the best about the people she loves. She never questions. My whole life I had believed that was a virtue. Sitting in that lobby, I understood it had been a weapon used against me. I decided in that moment that I was done being easy to use. Breakfast was the performance of my life. We ate in the hotel restaurant, Trevor and I, at a small table near the wall. He ordered eggs and coffee and was warm in a way that made my stomach turn attentive, smiling, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Deeply," I said. "You, better than I have in years." He smiled. "I think I was just nervous. Big day yesterday. But now that it's done, I feel so settled, Grace. I feel like everything is exactly where it's supposed to be." I looked at him across that table, and I thought I have a recording of your voice on my phone right now. I thought my attorney is already drafting notes. I thought you have 6 months planned, and I have 4 days. "Me too," I said, and I smiled back and I poured my coffee, and I asked him about his plans for the week ahead. He talked for 20 minutes. I listened to every word and stored it the way you store information you might need later, cataloging it, filing it. He mentioned a property deal closing in the next few weeks. He mentioned a lunch with his brother. He mentioned nothing, not a single word about the phone call, or the late-night walk, or the 47 minutes he had spent in room 412 with my best friend on our wedding night. He was very good. I had to admit that even then. He was very, very good. But he had made one mistake, maybe two. He had underestimated me, and he had left his phone on the table between us when he got up to use the restroom. I want to be clear about what I did next. I want to be honest because this story is about truth, and truth cuts both ways, and I'm not going to paint myself as purely innocent in every moment of what followed. When Trevor walked away from the table, I looked at his phone. I did not touch it. I did not pick it up. But I saw the screen because he hadn't turned it face down the way people do when they're hiding something, because he was comfortable, because he was confident, because he believed he was safe. There was a notification preview on the screen, a text from a contact saved as J. The preview read, "Last night was harder than I thought. When you held her hand and said those words, that was all I could see before it cut off. But it was enough. I looked up from the phone and stared straight ahead, and I breathed through my nose one long breath, and I let the anger move through me and out of me because I could not afford it right now. Anger was for later. Anger was for when I was ready. Right now, I needed to be Grace, the trusting, the uncomplicated, the woman who never questioned. When Trevor came back to the table, I was sipping my coffee and looking out the window. "You look thoughtful," he said, settling back into his chair. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," I said. He reached across and took my hand again. "We both are." I squeezed his fingers and smiled and thought 4 days. We checked out of the hotel that afternoon. We drove back to Trevor's house, our house as of yesterday, though my name was not yet on anything, a fact Patricia had noted carefully when I mentioned it. I had planned to address the practical matters of merging households over the coming weeks. Now those plans served a different purpose entirely. The house felt different when I walked into it that Sunday afternoon. Not the building itself, not the rooms, but my relationship to it. 2 days ago, I had walked through these rooms thinking about the future I was building. Now I walked through them, noting what was his, what was mine, what was nothing yet. Trevor brought in our bags and went to check on something in his office, and I stood in the kitchen and called my daughter. "Mom!" Renee picked up immediately. She knew my voice in all its registers the way children know their mothers. "Are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I will be. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not panic." Yes, a pause. "Mom, you're scaring me." "I know, I'm sorry, just listen." I told her the short version. Just the facts, no embellishment. I heard her breathing change on the other end of the line, that particular quality of breath that precedes real anger, the kind of anger that is actually fear wearing a harder face. "I'm coming there," she said. "Not yet." "Mom." "Renee, listen to me. If you come here right now, Trevor knows something is wrong. I need him to stay calm and comfortable and completely unsuspecting for the next 4 days. Can you understand that?" Silence. Then, what happens in 4 days? Patricia Greer is helping me. I meet with her Monday morning. By Thursday, I want to have everything in place. Another silence, this one longer. I could feel her working it out, sorting through the impulse to act against the logic of the plan. "He had his phone," she said finally, "on the table at breakfast." I hadn't told her that detail. "How did you know?" "Because men like that are always confident," she said, her voice quiet and flat. "They always think they're the smartest person in the room." I had not thought about it in those terms, but as soon as she said it, I recognized it. "Yes," I said, "exactly like that." "Okay," Renee said. "Okay, 4 days. But Mom, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If anything changes, if anything feels unsafe, you call me and you get out of that house." "It's not that kind of situation." "Promise me anyway." "I promise." After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then Trevor came in and asked if I wanted tea, and I said yes, and I watched him fill the kettle and set it on the stove, and I thought about how well we can live alongside something unbearable when we have no other choice. Monday morning, I was at Patricia's office at 8:15. She was already there, coffee in hand, a yellow legal pad in front of her, covered in handwritten notes. Patricia Greer was 64 years old, had been practicing family law for 35 years, and had the particular calm of someone who had seen every version of human betrayal there was to see, and had stopped being surprised by any of it. That calm was exactly what I needed. I sat down across from her, and she slid a box of tissues across the desk. A reflex, I understood a professional courtesy, and I looked at the tissues and thought not yet. "Tell me about the financials," she said. "Everything you know." So I told her. Trevor's income sources, the real estate, a rental property in the next county, an investment portfolio I knew existed, but whose details I had never been privy to, which Patricia noted on her pad with particular attention. The house which was in his name alone. The joint checking account we had opened together 3 weeks before the wedding, and into which I had deposited $6,000 of my own money as the start of our shared household fund. When I got to the joint account, Patricia put her pen down. "How much of your personal savings did you move into shared accounts?" she asked. "Just the $6,000 in checking. Everything else is still in my personal accounts." She looked visibly relieved. "Good. Do not touch the joint account. Do not move anything. Do not give him any reason to check the balances or shift assets." "Understood." "Grace." She leaned forward slightly. "I want to be straight with you. A marriage of less than 48 hours, evidence of premeditated fraud and collusion, potential financial manipulation. This is actually a strong case, but it depends on what we can document. The recording is significant. I want a full copy today." I had already forwarded it to her email from my phone. "Done. Sent it before I left the house this morning." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite categorize. Something between professional admiration and personal sympathy. "You are very composed for someone who just went through this." "I'm not composed," I said. "I'm just focused. There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "There is." Patricia's strategy was this: grounds for annulment on the basis of fraud. In our state, a marriage can be annulled if it can be proved that one party entered into it through deliberate deception, specifically if the marriage was part of a premeditated plan to deceive the other party for financial or personal gain. The recording, combined with any financial documentation we could gather, was the foundation. "I want to depose Jasmine Whitaker," she said. The name landed on me like a weight. Jasmine. She was a direct participant. Her testimony or her refusal to testify will matter. I thought about 19 years. I thought about the rehearsal dinner toast that made people cry. I thought about 3 dress fittings. "She'll deny everything," I said. "Maybe, but she's on that recording, Grace. Her voice, her words, she knows that. And people who know they're caught make mistakes when they're deposed." I sat with that for a moment. "And Trevor?" Patricia's expression didn't change. "Trevor will negotiate. When he realizes what we have, he will want to settle quietly. Men like this, and I have seen many, many men like this, they do not want public exposure. They want it to go away." "I don't want it to go away," I said, and my voice was harder than I expected. "I want there to be consequences." She looked at me steadily. "Then we make sure there are." I drove home from Patricia's office, and I did something I had been putting off since Sunday morning. I sat in my car in the driveway and I called Jasmine. She picked up on the second ring. "Grace?" Her voice was warm, textured with concern that sounded completely genuine, and for a terrible moment I felt the pull of 19 years, the dinners, the late-night calls, the way she had held my hand during my mother's surgery, all of it pressing against the cold truth I was holding. "Jasmine," I said, "how are you? I've been thinking about you. How is the honeymoon suite? Are you still in heaven? Tell me everything." I listened to her voice, and I thought about what she had said through that door. She always assumes the best about the people she loves. She never questions. "It was a lot," I said carefully. "There were some surprises." A beat, just a fraction of a second, but I felt it a small pause where there shouldn't have been one. "Surprises?" "Good ones, I hope." "Some," I said. "Not all. Listen, Jasmine, I think I need a few days to settle in before I see anyone, but I'll reach out soon. Okay." "Of course," she said, and her voice had shifted just slightly, a note I recognized as caution, as recalibration. She was smart enough to feel something off in my tone. She just didn't know how much I knew. "Take all the time you need. I'm here, always." I sat in the car after I hung up and thought, "No, you're not." Trevor noticed nothing. That is the extraordinary thing to me looking back. For the 4 days between Monday and Thursday, he noticed nothing. He brought me coffee in the morning, he asked about my day, he talked about the property deal and whether we should repaint the kitchen, and he was by every outward measure a man completely at ease in his life. And I was his wife asking questions and sipping coffee and making plans he couldn't see. On Wednesday evening, Patricia called me on my cell phone. I stepped outside onto the back porch the way Trevor always did when he got calls he didn't want me to hear, and I answered quietly. "We have a problem," she said, "and I need you to brace yourself." I gripped the phone. "Tell me." I pulled the financials on the property portfolio. "Grace, I don't want to alarm you, but Trevor has been structuring asset transfers over the past 8 months. He's been moving money." 8 months. 2 months before the engagement. "How much?" I said. "That's what we're still working out. But Grace, whoever helped him structure this, knew what they were doing. This wasn't random. This was planned." I stood on that back porch, and I looked at the trees at the edge of the yard, and I felt a new layer of the thing open up beneath me, like standing on ice, and hearing it crack and then crack again, and realizing the water below is deeper than you imagined. "Who helped him?" I said. Patricia was quiet for a moment that lasted too long. "We're still confirming," she said carefully, "but the financial advisor of record on 2 of the transfers is listed as a J. Whitaker." The air left my lungs. Jasmine had a finance background. Years ago, before her divorce, she had worked in wealth management. She had left the industry, she always said, because she hated the culture. She had talked about it over wine so many times, the stories from those days always framed as a past life she had been glad to leave. Except she hadn't left it entirely. She had put it to use. "Grace," Patricia said quietly. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I said. "I know this is—" "It's fine," I said, and even as I said it, I knew the word was wrong. I knew nothing about this was fine. But I needed one more day, just one more day before I walked back into that house and looked at that man and decided exactly how this was going to end. "Thursday," I said. "We move Thursday." "Thursday," she confirmed. I hung up. I stood on the porch for another minute, and I thought about a woman who had managed my trust like an asset, carefully, strategically knowing exactly when to invest it and what to use it for. Then I went back inside, and Trevor looked up from his book and smiled at me, and I smiled back, and I said, "It's getting cold out." And he said, "Come sit with me." And I did, one more day. Thursday came, the way days come when you've been counting them, not fast, not slow, but with a kind of terrible precision, each hour arriving exactly when it was supposed to, indifferent to how much weight you were carrying inside it. I woke before Trevor, again. I had barely slept more than 3 hours any night that week, but I had trained myself to lie still, to breathe evenly, to give nothing away in the dark. I had become, over the course of 4 days, someone I didn't entirely recognize, someone quieter and more deliberate than the Grace who had stood at that altar 6 days ago, believing with her whole heart that she was beginning something. I got up, I dressed, I went to the kitchen and made coffee the way I always did, his cup on the left, mine on the right, and I stood there waiting for it to brew, and I thought about Patricia's call the night before. She had called at 9:15. Trevor had been in the other room, and I had taken the call in the kitchen with the water running, a habit I'd developed that week for exactly this purpose. "We're ready," Patricia had said. "I have everything we need. The recording, the financial documentation, the asset transfer records. We file this morning." "This morning," I repeated. "I wanted to move before he has any reason to be on guard. If he's been monitoring accounts, and given the level of planning here, Grace, I wouldn't put it past him. We want to be ahead of it." I had stood there with the water running and felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, not grief. Something that was almost strangely relief, like a person who has been holding a very heavy door closed and finally feels someone on the other side push it open. "Do it," I said. "There's one more thing," Patricia said, and her voice had that particular careful quality that meant the next thing was significant. "I heard back from my contact at the county clerk's office. I asked them to pull any prior marriage records for Trevor Allen Callahan." I turned off the water. "And," I said, "Grace Trevor was married before. Not your knowledge, I take it." "He told me he had never been married." "He told you wrong." A pause. "Her name is Sandra Callahan née Morse. They married 22 years ago in this state. The divorce was finalized 14 years ago. There is a civil judgment attached to the divorce filing. Sandra sued him for fraud. The case was settled out of court." The kitchen was very quiet. "He did this before," I said, not a question. The words came out flat and certain because somewhere beneath the shock, some part of me had already been assembling this shape without knowing it. "The circumstances appear similar," Patricia said carefully. "I'm still pulling the full record, but Grace, you need to know this when you face him today, because he's going to try to manage you, and knowing that you are not the first is going to matter." After I hung up, I had gone back to the living room and sat next to Trevor on the couch and let him put his arm around me and watched whatever he'd put on television and said nothing for the rest of the evening. And I thought about Sandra Morse, whoever she was, wherever she was now, and I thought about how she must have felt 14 years ago, and I thought this ends with me. Trevor came downstairs at 7:30, surprised and pleased to find the coffee already made. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I said. Completely true. He poured his cup and stood beside me and kissed the top of my head. "Big week," he said. "We should do something this weekend. Drive out to the lake house, just the two of us. Reset." "I'd like that," I said. He had no idea there would be no weekend. He had no idea that at 8 o'clock that morning, Patricia Greer was walking into the county courthouse with a filing that would begin dismantling everything he had built. He finished his coffee, said he had calls to make, and went upstairs to his office. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. At 9:45, my phone buzzed. A text from Patricia filed. Process server en route. ET. At your location approximately 11 a.m. I read the text twice. I set the phone face down on the table. I picked up my cold coffee and drank the last of it and thought, here we go. At 10:15, Trevor came back downstairs. Something was different in his face, a tightness, a sharpened alertness, and for a terrible second I thought he already knew that somehow he had been warned that Jasmine had called him that Patricia's move hadn't been fast enough. Then he said, I have to run out for an hour. Property thing. Will you be okay here? Of course, I said. He grabbed his jacket. He paused at the door. Grace, he said, and for just a moment something crossed his face that I couldn't read, something that was almost real. I know this week has been a lot, the transition getting settled. I just want you to know I'm happy. I'm really happy.
Acham.
I looked at him standing in the doorway of a house I had never really lived in, wearing the face of a man I had never really known, and I said, I know you are Trevor. He left. I sat completely still for 30 seconds after the door closed. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia. He just left, I said. I don't know if he was warned. He might be heading somewhere. Okay. Her voice was sharp and immediate. I'll call the process server and have them intercept if possible. Grace, listen, wherever he goes, it doesn't change the filing. The papers will be served today, but I want you out of that house before he comes back. I'm not leaving before it's done. Grace, Patricia, I have spent 6 days being exactly who he expected me to be. I am not going to let him walk back into this house and find me gone. I want to be here. I want to look him in the face. A silence. Then, all right, but I'm sending someone to be there with you. My assistant, Marcus. He'll be there in 20 minutes. I didn't argue. Marcus arrived at 10:41, a young man in a dark coat with a quiet, steady manner that I immediately trusted. He sat at the kitchen table with me and we didn't say much. He was there as a witness. We both understood that. At 11:04, the doorbell rang. It was the process server, a woman, middle-aged professional who handed me a sealed envelope and asked me to confirm my name and relationship to Trevor Allen Callahan. I said yes to both. She thanked me and left. I set the envelope on the kitchen table. I did not open it. I already knew what was in it. At 11:47, Trevor's car pulled into the driveway. I heard the engine cut. I heard the car door. I heard his footsteps on the front walk. Marcus stood up from the table and moved to stand near the wall, quiet and present. Trevor came through the door and stopped the moment he saw Marcus. Grace. His eyes moved from me to Marcus and back. Who is this? This is Marcus, I said. He works with my attorney. The word attorney landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I watched the ripples move across Trevor's face, first confusion, then a rapid recalibration, then the very beginning of something he was trying very hard to keep controlled. Your attorney, he said. Patricia Greer, you haven't met her. I picked up the envelope from the table and held it out to him. But you're going to. He looked at the envelope. He didn't move toward it immediately. He was thinking I could see it, the internal computation running behind his eyes, measuring what he knew against what I might know, trying to identify the edges of the situation. Then he took it. He opened it. He read. The silence in that kitchen was the loudest thing I have ever heard. When he looked up, he had rearranged his face into something that was meant to look confused and hurt, and it was a genuinely impressive performance, and 6 days ago it would have worked on me completely. Grace, he said, what is this? You know what it is. An annulment. Why would you? He stopped, started again. Grace, whatever you think is going on, I promise you. Trevor. My voice came out calm and level and utterly final. I was outside room 412. I heard everything. The performance stopped, just like that. The confusion, the hurt, the managed innocence, all of it dropped the way a curtain drops when the show is over. What was underneath was quieter and harder and somehow more honest than anything he had shown me in 3 years. He set the papers down on the table. He looked at me for a long moment. "How much did you hear?" he said. And that was when I understood fully and completely the kind of man I had married. Not what did you hear, how much. Calculating immediately what I had and what he could still deny. "All of it," I said, and I recorded it. Something moved across his face then, something I can only describe as a kind of collapse, an internal structure giving way, and for a brief moment I saw something that might have been genuine. Not remorse, not regret exactly, more like the look of a person who has played a very long, very complicated game and has just realized in the final move that they have lost. "Grace," he started. "Don't," I said. "Please, I have 19 minutes of audio. I have the financial transfer records. I know about Sandra Morse." The name hit him like a physical thing. His face went very still. "I know you've done this before," I said. "I know I am not the first woman you married and planned to leave, and I want you to understand something, Trevor. This ends here, not in 6 months, not on your timeline, today." The kitchen was completely silent. Then Trevor did something I had not predicted. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table in front of him, and he looked at them and he said quietly, without any performance left in his voice at all, "How did you know in the hall? What made you follow me?" I stared at him. "Your laugh," I said. "I'd know your laugh anywhere." He nodded slowly, like a man absorbing something. "I should have been more careful," he said, not to me, almost to himself. "Yes," I said, "you should have." He called his attorney from the living room. I could hear pieces of the conversation, not the words, just the tone, which was controlled and low and deliberate. The tone of a man who had been in this situation before and knew the steps. When he came back to the kitchen, he had rearranged himself again this time into something colder, more formal, the version of Trevor I had never met before, because he had never needed to show it to me. "I'll cooperate," he said, "with the annulment. I won't contest it." "I know you won't," I said, "because if you do, the recording becomes part of the public filing." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What about the financial? Patricia handles all of that." "Grace." Something shifted in his voice. Just for a moment it came close to human. "For what it's worth, the beginning was real. When I first met you, that part was real." I looked at him. I thought about the Italian restaurant and the Tuesday afternoons at the library and the way he had said, "I don't want to waste any more time, Grace." I thought about the version of those 3 years that I had believed in, and I thought about the version that was true. "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't, because a real beginning doesn't have an ending already planned." He had nothing to say to that. I called Renee from the driveway while Marcus waited inside. She picked up before the first ring finished. "Mom, tell me." "He was served. He's not contesting. I'm leaving the house now." I heard her exhale a long, shuddering breath that told me exactly how much she had been holding since Sunday. "Where are you going?" "To you," I said, "if that's okay." "Mom," her voice broke just slightly. "Get in your car and drive, right now. I'll have dinner ready." I had packed a bag that morning before Trevor came downstairs. Just the essentials. My documents, my medications, the photographs I had brought into the house, the things that were mine before and were still mine now. One bag. It was in the trunk already. I was about to start the engine when my phone rang. Not Renee, not Patricia. Jasmine. I sat and looked at her name on the screen for 3 full rings. Then I answered. "Grace." Her voice was tight in a way she was trying to hide. She knew. Trevor had told her, or she had sensed it, or it didn't matter. She knew something had broken. I heard from Trevor. He said there are legal papers. "There are," I said. A long silence. "Grace, I need you to hear me out." "Jasmine." My voice was steady, completely steady. I have the recording. I have the financial records with your name on the transfer documents. Patricia Greer is aware of your role in all of this. Whatever you were about to say to me, say it to your own attorney." The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. When she spoke again, her voice had changed entirely. The warmth was gone. What was left was something flatter, more careful. "You're making a mistake," she said. "No," I said. "I made the mistake 3 years ago. This is the correction." I hung up. I started the car. I pulled out of the driveway of the house I had moved into 6 days ago, and I did not look back at it. Renee met me at the door. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled me inside, took the bag from my hand, and held on to me for a long moment. My daughter, 32 years old, who had asked careful questions I hadn't wanted to answer, who had called it before I could see it, who had said, "Promise me anyway," and meant it with every part of herself. "I'm okay," I told her. "I know you are," she said, "but you're allowed to not be for a little while, too." I sat at her kitchen table, a smaller table, a quieter house, an ordinary Tuesday evening dinner of soup and bread, and I felt something unknot in my chest that I hadn't fully known was knotted, something that had been held rigid since midnight on my wedding night. "Tell me everything," Renee said, sitting across from me. So I did. I told her about Sandra Morse. I watched something hard and protective move through my daughter's face. "He's done this before," she said almost to herself. "He actually did this before." "Yes." "Do you know what happened to her, Sandra?" "Not yet. Patricia is still pulling the records." Renee was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to find her." I looked up. "What?" "I want to find Sandra Morse, because if he did this to her, and she settled quietly, and nobody ever knew, then nobody ever warned the next woman, which was you." She looked at me steadily. "I don't want there to be a next woman after you." I sat with that. Sitting in my daughter's kitchen, eating soup that was ordinary and warm and entirely real, I thought about a woman I had never met, who had been through some version of what I was going through 14 years ago. I thought about whether she had had a daughter sitting across from her. I thought about whether she had been alone. "Okay," I said. "Let's find her." Renee nodded. She picked up her phone. And that was how I learned that the story I thought was ending was actually just beginning to grow into something larger than I had imagined, something that wasn't only about Trevor, and wasn't only about Jasmine, and wasn't only about me. It was about a pattern. A deliberate, repeated pattern. And patterns I had learned that week leave evidence. And evidence in the right hands is not just protection. It is power. Renee found Sandra Morse in 40 minutes. That's how long it took my daughter, sitting at her kitchen table with a bowl of soup going cold beside her, to locate a woman who had been invisible for 14 years. A LinkedIn profile in a neighboring state. A name that matched. A face in the profile photo that told me everything before I even read a single word. Because Sandra Morse had the look of a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up and wanted you to know it. Strong posture, direct eyes. The particular kind of confidence that doesn't come from ease. It comes from survival. "That's her," Renee said. "Has to be." I looked at the photo for a long moment. She was about my age, maybe a few years older. She had a good face, an honest face. I thought about what she must have looked like 14 years ago, before whatever Trevor had put her through, and I felt a wave of something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived somewhere right between them. "Can you find a contact?" I asked. Renee was already scrolling. "There's an email, professional contact. She runs a financial consulting firm." She paused. "Actually, Mom, look at this." I leaned in. Sandra's firm specialized in fraud detection and asset recovery. She had built an entire career around the thing that had been done to her. I sat back in my chair and let that land. "She turned it into her life's work," I said. "She turned him into her life's work," Renee said quietly. Without knowing, it was him. We stared at each other across the table. "Write to her?" I said. Renee drafted the email and I revised it, and we sent it at 9:47 that evening from my personal address. We kept it brief. We identified ourselves. We named Trevor Allen Callahan, and we said we believed we had information relevant to her prior case and that we would welcome a conversation at her convenience. We did not include details. We did not need to. If she was who we believed she was, the name alone would be enough. I went to bed at Renee's house that night, and I slept for 7 hours straight, the first real sleep I had gotten since my wedding night. I woke up to a response from Sandra Morse, sitting in my inbox time-stamped at 6:02 a.m. It was 3 sentences long. I've been waiting 14 years for someone to contact me about Trevor Callahan. I'll clear my schedule. Tell me when. I read it twice. Then I carried my phone downstairs and showed it to Renee, who was already making coffee, and watched her read it, and watched her face do the same thing mine had done. "Call her this morning," Renee said. "I will." "Mom," Renee set the phone down and looked at me directly. "This is bigger than your annulment." "I know. Patricia needs to know about this. I'm calling her first." Patricia's response to Sandra Morse was not surprise. It was the focused, accelerated energy of someone who had just been handed the piece they had been missing. "A prior victim with a settled civil judgment," she said. "Grace, do you understand what this does to the case?" "It establishes a pattern," I said. "It doesn't just establish it, it proves it was intentional, premeditated. Not a situational lapse in judgment, not a marriage gone wrong. A system, a deliberate, repeated system." A pause. "I want to speak to Sandra directly. Can you arrange that?" She already said she'd clear her schedule. Patricia made a sound I had never heard from her before, something almost like satisfaction. "All right. This changes our approach significantly. I was prepared to push for a clean annulment and the return of your $6,000. Now I'm thinking about something considerably larger." "What do you mean?" "Trevor has been doing this. Possibly more than twice. If there are other women, and Grace, given the sophistication of the asset structuring, I suspect there may be, then what we're looking at is not just a fraud case, it's potentially criminal." The word sat between us on the phone line. "Criminal," I repeated. "I want you to understand that taking this further means it becomes public. It means depositions, possibly testimony, a level of exposure that an annulment settlement would not require." She paused. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what's possible." I looked out Renee's kitchen window. I thought about Sandra's 3-sentence email. I thought about the 14 years she had been waiting. I thought about the women who might come after me if this stayed quiet, if it settled behind closed doors, the way it had before, if Trevor Allen Callahan walked away from this, the way he had walked away from everything else, inconvenienced, reorganized, but ultimately unaccountable. "Make the call to Sandra," I said. "And then let's talk about what criminal looks like." "Oh." Sandra Morse's voice on the phone was exactly what her photograph suggested. Clear, direct, and carrying underneath it a steadiness that had been hard-won. She did not hesitate. She did not need to be convinced. From the moment she said hello, she spoke like a woman who had been rehearsing this conversation in her head for a decade and a half. "He told me he'd never been married either," she said when I had finished giving her the short version. "First thing I thought when I heard your name was, how did he explain that? Because he would have had to explain something." "He didn't," I said. "He just said he'd never been married. I never checked." A pause. Not judgmental, just acknowledging. "Neither did I," she said. "I was 51. I thought, who lies about something that verifiable? It never occurred to me to verify it." "Did you know about Jasmine? Was there someone like her in your case?" "His business partner at the time," Sandra said without missing a beat. "A man, not a woman. But same role, inside information, financial coordination, someone Trevor had complete trust with. The two of them had been planning the asset restructuring for about a year before we married." A pause. "When I found out, I went to an attorney. Trevor's lawyer offered a settlement the first week. I was so desperate to be done with it, to not have to see him again, to not have to say any of this out loud in a courtroom. I took it." "Do you regret that?" I asked. And I held my breath because her answer mattered to me in a way I hadn't entirely anticipated. Her answer came without hesitation. "Every single day," she said. "Every single day since I've wondered how many women came after me. And I never did anything about it because I thought I settled. I signed. I had no ground left to stand on." "You have ground now," I said. A silence. A long one. Then Sandra Morse said in a voice that was quieter than everything else she'd said, "Yes, I think I do." Patricia convened a conference call that afternoon herself, me, Sandra, and a colleague of hers named Howard Briggs, who handled financial fraud cases. I sat at Renee's kitchen table with a notepad and listened to the shape of the thing expand in real time. The core of it was this: Trevor Allen Callahan had a documented history of targeting women in their 50s, widowed or divorced, financially stable, socially trusting. He would establish a genuine-seeming relationship over an extended period, long enough to build real trust, short enough to prevent deep scrutiny. He would engineer a marriage. In the run-up to the marriage, he would structure asset transfers with the assistance of a financial collaborator. Sandra's case, a business partner. Mine, Jasmine. The marriage would last 6 months, during which he would establish joint financial access, move additional assets, and then file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, walking away with whatever he had accumulated. In Sandra's case, the settlement had been significant but quiet. In mine, the recording had disrupted the timeline, and he had not yet gained full financial access. The $6,000 in the joint account was the only exposure. "The question," Howard said, "is whether there are others between Sandra and Grace." 8 years, Patricia said. "That's the gap between the two confirmed cases. That's a long time for someone operating this deliberately to have been inactive." "He wasn't inactive," Sandra said. Her voice was flat and certain. "I'd bet my career on that." "How do we find them?" Renee asked. She had been listening silently from across the table, and when she spoke, all 4 of us on the call registered the sharpness of it. "Carefully," Howard said, "and legally. Marriage records are public, divorce filings are public, fraud civil suits are public. It's tedious, but it's traceable." "How long?" I asked. 2 weeks for an initial sweep. Maybe less if Sandra can help us understand the financial signature. She knows what his structuring looks like better than anyone." "I can do that," Sandra said. That evening after the call, I was sitting alone on Renee's couch when my phone rang. "Trevor." I looked at the screen for 2 full rings, then I answered. "Grace." His voice was careful, measured. The voice of a man who had spoken to his attorney and was now operating inside a set of boundaries he'd been given. "I'm not calling to fight. I want you to know that." "Then why are you calling?" A pause. "I want to ask you something. Directly. No lawyers." "Go ahead." "How far are you planning to take this?" I sat with the question for a moment. I thought about what Patricia had said about criminal exposure. I thought about Sandra's voice. I thought about the women in the 8-year gap that Howard was going to look for. "As far as it needs to go," I said. The silence on his end was different from the silence in the kitchen on Thursday, less controlled, something underneath it that was closer to the edge. "Grace." His voice shifted and what came through, and I want to be clear, I did not trust it. I did not soften toward it, but I registered it sounded genuinely shaken. "If this goes where I think you're taking it, this isn't just annulment territory anymore." "No," I said. "It isn't. There are things that this could get very complicated for a lot of people." "Trevor," I kept my voice even. "You should say all of this to Patricia. That's all I have for you." I ended the call. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from the effort of staying completely composed while something inside me wanted desperately to ask him why. Not the logistics of why not the strategic why, but the real one. Why me? Why this? Why take something that could have been real and use it for something so deliberately cruel? But I already knew there was no answer to that question that would help me. And I had stopped asking questions I couldn't use. 2 weeks later, Howard Briggs found a name, Margaret Ossie, 57 at the time of her marriage to Trevor 7 years ago. Widowed, financially comfortable, a retired school teacher from 2 counties over. The marriage had lasted 5 months and 23 days before Trevor filed for divorce. The divorce was uncontested. Margaret had signed everything. There was no fraud suit on record, no civil case, nothing public at all, which meant either Margaret hadn't known, or she had known and done nothing, or she had done something privately that never reached a public record. Patricia called me with the name on a Tuesday morning. I was at my mother's house by then. I had moved from Renee's at the end of the first week, partly because I needed the particular comfort of my mother's presence, and partly because she had sensed something was wrong the moment I arrived, and had asked me with her characteristic directness, "What did he do?" And I had told her everything, and she had listened without interruption, which is one of the hardest and most loving things a person can do. "Margaret O.C.," I said to Patricia, "do you have contact information? Working on it. I want to reach out to her myself, before lawyers, before anything formal." I paused. I want her to hear it from a person, not a process. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "That's not standard procedure." "I know, but Sandra heard it from me first, and it made a difference. Let me try." It took 4 days to find a working phone number for Margaret Osei. Renee found it through a community newsletter for a church organization Margaret was involved with. I called on a Friday afternoon and got her voicemail and left a message that was carefully, painfully composed. I said my name. I said I was calling about a personal matter that I believed we might share, and I left my number. She called back in 11 minutes. "You married Trevor Callahan," she said, before I even finished introducing myself. My heart stopped for a beat. "Yes," I said. "You know about me. I know about the wedding." A pause. "I still have people who know him. Word travels." Another pause. "Did you know when you called me that we're the same?" "I suspected," I said. "Tell me what happened." And Margaret O.C., who had been a retired school teacher, who had married a man she trusted, who had signed everything without a fight, and told herself it was just a terrible mistake she was putting behind her, told me. Her voice was quiet and steady, in the way of someone who has processed something thoroughly and painfully over 7 years, and reached a place of acceptance that wasn't peace, but was the closest thing available. "He had someone helping him," she said. "A woman. I never knew her name. I never knew what she had to do with anything until later when a friend suggested I look at the financial timing, and I saw how things had moved. Jasmine, I thought. Or someone before Jasmine. "Did you keep records?" A pause. "I kept everything," she said. "I kept everything because I didn't know what to do with it, and I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. 7 years of paper in a box in my closet." My hand tightened on the phone. "Margaret, I'm working with an attorney named Patricia Greer and a fraud specialist named Howard Briggs. I want to ask you something, and I want you to take whatever time you need to answer it." "Ask," she said. "Are you willing to come forward?" The silence stretched. I listened to it, and I did not fill it because this was a question only she could answer, and she deserved the space to find it. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Something in it had opened. "My husband, my first husband before Trevor, he always said that doing the right thing was rarely the easy thing. He said the hard ones are the ones that matter." A breath. "He would have wanted me to do this." I closed my eyes. "Then we do it together," I said. Patricia filed the expanded fraud complaint the following Monday morning. 3 complainants, Sandra Morse, Margaret Osei, and me. 14 years of documented pattern, 2 prior cases, asset transfer records, financial collaboration evidence, and 19 minutes of audio recorded on a wedding night in an ivory silk nightgown with a pocket. Howard estimated the total financial exposure across all 3 cases at just over $800,000. Jasmine's attorney contacted Patricia the same day the filing went public. She wanted to negotiate. She wanted to be characterized as a secondary participant with limited knowledge of the full scheme. She wanted a deal. Patricia called me with the offer. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "What does Sandra want?" I said. "What does Margaret want?" "I asked them both before I called you," Patricia said. "They said it's your call. You're the most recent. You have the recording. I thought about Jasmine standing at my altar in a pale pink dress, holding a bouquet of white flowers. I thought about her toast at the rehearsal dinner, the one that made people cry. I thought about 19 years. I thought about what she'd said through that door. She always assumes the best about the people she loves, and how she had said it not with guilt, but with the smooth, comfortable familiarity of someone describing a tool they had used successfully before. "No deal," I said. Patricia didn't miss a beat. "Understood." "Patricia, one more thing." "Yes, I want her to have to say it out loud," I said. "In a room, on the record. I want there to be a record that says this happened, that these women existed, that we were real, and what was done to us was real. Not a quiet settlement. Not a closed file." I paused. "Do you understand what I'm asking for?" "Perfectly," Patricia said. And I could hear in her voice 35 years of this, every version of betrayal. There was something that might have been the closest she let herself get to personal investment in an outcome. "Good," I said. And then I went to sit with my mother, who was watching her afternoon program in the living room, and who looked up when I came in and patted the cushion beside her without a word, and I sat down next to the woman who had known me longer than anyone alive, and I let the afternoon move around us, unhurried and ordinary, while somewhere across town the machinery of accountability was already in motion. There were things still ahead. There were days that would be hard in ways I couldn't yet anticipate. Trevor's attorney was going to push back. The deposition process was going to be exhausting. Jasmine's face across a conference table was going to cost me something I hadn't finished paying yet. But I had Sandra's voice on the phone. I had Margaret's box of 7 years of paper. I had my daughter who had asked the careful questions I hadn't wanted to answer. I had my mother's hand on my arm. I had 19 minutes of audio and the cold, clear knowledge of exactly what I was worth, not in Trevor's estimation, not in Jasmine's calculation, but in the only accounting that had ever actually mattered, my own. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November, 6 weeks after Patricia filed the expanded complaint. I had been told what to expect. Patricia had walked me through it twice, the format, the questions, the way Trevor's attorney would try to reframe things, the importance of staying factual, unemotional, precise. I had done everything she said. I had reviewed my timeline. I had listened to the recording one more time, not because I needed to confirm what was on it, but because I needed to hear my own steadiness in that hotel hallway, the way my hand had held the phone without shaking, and remember that I had been capable of that even at the worst moment. I needed to carry that into the room. What I had not been fully prepared for was seeing Trevor in person. He was already seated when Patricia and I arrived. He looked older than I remembered, which didn't make sense given that it had only been 6 weeks, but grief and anger and the particular exhaustion of legal proceedings do things to a person's face that have nothing to do with time. His attorney, a trim, silver-haired man named Gerald Foss, who had the smooth, professional remove of someone paid to be the calmest person in any room, sat beside him. Trevor looked up when I walked in, just for a second. Then he looked away. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. I looked at Gerald Foss and waited. The first hour was procedural. Dates, facts, the chronology of the relationship laid out in the dry language of legal documentation. I answered everything directly. I did not elaborate beyond what was asked. Patricia had told me answer the question that was asked, nothing more, nothing less, and I held to that like a rail. Then Gerald Foss said, "Mrs. Callahan." "Montgomery," I said. He paused. "I beg your pardon. My name is Grace Montgomery. The annulment has been filed. I am not Mrs. Callahan." A small silence. Patricia did not react visibly, but I felt her approval from 6 inches away. Gerald Foss nodded slowly. "Ms. Montgomery, you've characterized my client's actions as premeditated fraud. I'd like to explore the basis for that characterization. Specifically, is it possible that what you heard through the door of room 412 was a private conversation taken out of context?" I looked at him steadily. "No. You were in an emotionally heightened state. It was your wedding night. You'd been drinking." "I had 1 glass of champagne," I said. Over the course of 2 hours. Still, Mr. Foss. My voice stayed level. I have 19 minutes of audio. The recording is not my interpretation of what I heard. It is what was said. Would you like me to walk through the specific statements that establish premeditation, or would you prefer to hear the recording play again in this room? Gerald Foss looked at his notepad. He moved on. The real moment came 40 minutes later, and I did not see it coming. Gerald Foss said, "I want to ask you about a conversation you had with my client on the evening of October 5th, 4 days before the wedding, a phone call approximately 9 minutes long. Do you recall that conversation?" I thought back. October 5th, 4 days before. "We spoke on the phone most evenings," I said. "Yes." "Do you recall him expressing reservations about the marriage during that call?" I went very still. "No." "He didn't tell you he was having doubts, that he wasn't sure he was ready?" "No." I looked at him directly. He did not say that. Gerald Foss opened a folder and slid a single printed page across the table. "This is a transcript of that call, Ms. Montgomery. My client retained recordings of his personal phone calls as a standard business practice. I'd direct your attention to the highlighted section." I looked at the page. Patricia leaned in beside me. I read the highlighted lines. And then I felt something shift. Not collapse, not break, but shift, the way ground shifts when you step on something unexpected. In the transcript, Trevor's voice said, "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if it's fair to her." And Jasmine's voice responded, "You're in it now. You can't stop now. I read it twice, 3 times. You're in it now. You can't stop now." Gerald Foss said carefully, "Ms. Montgomery, is it possible that my client had genuine feelings for you that were at various points in conflict with the arrangement he had made with Ms. Whitaker? That this was not a simple, clean scheme, but a more complicated situation in which—" "No," I said. "You're very certain of Mr. Foss." I put the transcript down. I looked at him and then at Trevor, who had been staring at the table and now looked up, and I held his gaze for the first time since I walked into that room. What that transcript tells me is that Jasmine Whitaker told my husband he couldn't stop. That means she was running this. That means when he wavered, she pushed him forward. That does not make him a victim. It makes her more culpable than I already knew she was. But it does not make him innocent. I paused. It just means there were 2 people who chose to do this to me instead of 1. Trevor looked away first. Patricia touched my arm lightly under the table. Just once. Just for a second. Jasmine's deposition was the following Thursday. I was not in the room for it. Patricia advised against it, and I agreed because there was no version of sitting across from Jasmine Whitaker in a formal proceeding that I could get through without it costing me more than it was worth. Instead, I sat in the waiting area of Patricia's office building with a cup of tea that went cold in my hands, and I waited. Patricia came out 2 hours and 17 minutes later. She sat down beside me and said without preamble, "She broke." I looked at her. "What do you mean broke?" 40 minutes in, Gerald Foss objected to a line of questioning and called a recess. When we reconvened, Jasmine Whitaker dismissed him. Patricia paused, letting that settle. She dismissed her own attorney in the middle of a deposition, and then she said she wanted to make a statement. My hands tightened around the cold cup. What statement? She confirmed everything. The planning, the timeline, the financial structuring, her role in coordinating the asset transfers, the conversation in room 412. Patricia looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before, something that was almost wonder. She said, and I'm quoting directly, "I need to say this where it will be heard. I need there to be a record. What I did to Grace Montgomery was deliberate, and it was wrong. And I have known that since the night it started, and I did it anyway." I sat with that for a long moment. "Did she say why?" I asked. "Why she finally?" She said she read the filing, the full complaint. Sandra's case, Margaret's case, yours. Patricia paused. She said when she saw Margaret Osie's name, she stopped being able to make it make sense anymore. She said she hadn't known about Margaret. She thought she and Trevor had done it once before with Sandra, and that Sandra had been treated, she used the word, fairly. Her word, not mine. When she saw there had been a third woman she knew nothing about, she said it became something she couldn't hold anymore. I thought about Jasmine's voice through that door. I keep thinking about her face. During the vows, she looked so, and Trevor's voice cutting her off sharp. Don't do that. She had felt it then. 6 weeks ago, on my wedding night, she had already felt the edge of it. She had just let him push her back from it one more time. And Margaret Osei, who had never met Jasmine, who had no idea she existed, Margaret had been the thing that finally made Jasmine lose her footing. "What does this mean for the case?" I asked. Patricia straightened. Back to business, which was how she showed care. "It means Trevor has no defense. His own co-conspirator just testified against him on the record. Howard is already in contact with the district attorney's office." A pause. "Grace, this is going to go criminal. Felony fraud minimum. Possibly more depending on what Howard turns up in the financials." I nodded slowly. "And Jasmine? She'll cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced charge. She won't walk away clean, but she won't see the same exposure Trevor will." Patricia looked at me carefully. "Is that acceptable to you?" I thought about 19 years. I thought about what she had said in that deposition room. I have known that since the night it started, and I did it anyway. I thought about the fact that she had said it at all, that she had dismissed her attorney, and put it on the record that she had chosen at the last possible moment to stop. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't there yet, and I might never be. But it was something. "Yes," I said, "that's acceptable." Trevor Allen Callahan was indicted on 3 counts of felony fraud 8 weeks later. I found out from Patricia, who called me on a Wednesday afternoon while I was at my mother's house helping her with her physical therapy exercises. She had been having trouble with her knee, and I had been coming 3 afternoons a week, and those 3 afternoons had become one of the most anchoring things in my life during those months. Something ordinary, something real, something that required my presence in the most uncomplicated way possible. My mother looked at my face when I hung up and said, "Good news." "Yes," I said. "Then why do you look like that?" I thought about it. "Because it doesn't fix anything," I said. "It's right and it matters and it needed to happen, but it doesn't fix what was broken." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said with the directness that had always been her particular form of love, "No, it doesn't fix it. It just means the person who broke it has to answer for it. Those are different things, and both of them matter." I sat with that. It was the clearest thing anyone had said to me in months. Sandra called me the evening of the indictment. She sounded different from the first call lighter, though not light, if that distinction makes sense. Like a person who had set down something they had been carrying so long they'd stopped noticing the weight, and was now feeling for the first time what it was like to have their hands free. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Strange," I said. "Like the ending of something, except not quite an ending." "It's not," she agreed. "There's still the trial, or the plea if his attorney negotiates. There's still the civil recovery for what was taken from Margaret and me. There's still a lot of road." A pause. "But this part is done. And you did this, Grace. You and that pocket." I laughed. It surprised me, a real laugh, sudden and genuine, the kind that feels like something releasing. "That pocket," I said. 19 minutes, Sandra said. 19 minutes, and a pocket changed all of it. "You helped change all of it," I said. "You and Margaret both. I couldn't have built this without you." "Maybe not." A pause. "But you started it. In a hotel hallway at midnight, in your nightgown, barefoot." I could hear the smile in her voice. "That takes something." After I hung up, I sat for a long time. I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago, standing at an altar believing she was beginning something. I thought about the woman I had become, not better, not worse, but sharper, more honest about myself and about what I had refused to see. I thought about the questions I had not asked and should have. I thought about Renee's voice. How well do you really know him, and my irritation at being asked. I was not going to do that again. I was not going to let love make me incurious. I was not going to let trust replace attention. But I was also not going to let this story be the one that closed me. That was the other thing I had decided somewhere in those months, and I held to it with the same quiet firmness I had held to everything else. Margaret Osei drove 4 hours to meet me in person the week after the indictment. We sat across from each other in a coffee shop in a town roughly equidistant between us, and we talked for 3 hours. And at some point, I looked across the table at this woman I had found through a church newsletter and thought about all the strange, jagged ways that people find each other through terrible things, and how sometimes those people become something you didn't know you were missing. "What do you do now?" she asked near the end of the afternoon. "With your life, I mean, after all this settles." I had thought about this. More than about anything else I had thought about this. "I'm going back to the library," I said. "I took a leave of absence. I'm going back." She smiled. "Good. And I'm going to take better care of the things that were always actually mine. My kids, my mother, my work. The things that were there before him and are still there now." I paused. I gave a lot of myself to a story that wasn't real. I want to put that energy somewhere it belongs. Margaret nodded slowly. "I started volunteering at my church again," she said. "After Trevor, I pulled back from everything. I was ashamed, which is absurd, I know that now, but it's what I felt. So I pulled back from my community, my friends, my church. And that pulling back was the loneliest part. Lonelier than the divorce itself." She looked at me. "Don't do that. Don't let shame make you smaller." I heard that. I filed it in the place where the things that matter go. "I won't," I said. 3 months after the indictment, Trevor Callahan accepted a plea agreement, 2 counts of felony fraud, restitution to all 3 complainants, no prison time in exchange for full financial disclosure, and a consent order that would make any future marriage legally subject to prior fraud disclosure, a condition Howard called unprecedented in our jurisdiction, and Patricia called the best outcome she had negotiated in 15 years. It was not everything. I had wanted more, and so had Sandra, and so had Margaret, and we had all sat on separate phones with Patricia and said so, and Patricia had walked us through the calculus of a trial, the time, the cost, the uncertainty, the exposure, and we had made the decision together, the 3 of us, which felt right, that it was a shared decision, that no one woman had to carry it alone. When Patricia called to confirm the plea was finalized, I was in the library, back at my desk, back among the stacks I had tended for 26 years, in a room that had been the same on my worst days as on my best, and had never once asked me to be anything other than the person who showed up. A teenager came to the desk while I was still on the phone with Patricia, waiting for help finding a book, shifting impatiently, earbuds around her neck. I held up one finger and she rolled her eyes with the magnificent rudeness of 17, and I thought, good, normal, real. "It's done," Patricia said. "I know," I said. "Grace." A pause. "You should be proud of what you built here." After I hung up, I helped the teenager find her book, a novel she needed for Class 1 I loved, and I told her so, and she looked at me with the polite skepticism of someone who does not yet believe that people over 40 have opinions worth hearing, and I thought, that's fine, she'll get there, and then I went back to work. There are things I do not have. I do not have the marriage I thought I was building. I do not have the best friend I believed I knew. I do not have the trust I carried into my 50s, the uncomplicated kind, the kind that doesn't ask questions. But I have the other things, the things that turned out to be real. My daughter who asked the hard questions. My son who flew home when I needed him and didn't make a production of it. My mother's hand on my arm on an afternoon when the world was heavy. Sandra's voice saying 19 minutes and a pocket changed all of it. Margaret's face across a coffee shop table reminding me not to let shame make me smaller. Patricia's 35 years of controlled, purposeful fury on behalf of women who had been wronged. My own hands steady in a hotel hallway at midnight, doing the one thing I could do. I am 53 years old. I have lived through the end of a marriage that should never have been a marriage, and the loss of a friendship that was never fully a friendship, and the discovery that the man I loved had been keeping a ledger on me since the day we met. And I am still here. Completely, entirely, undiminishably here. Not because nothing broke. Things broke. Things broke that I am still sorting through and will be for a long time. But I pressed record. I kept my pocket. I made my calls. I found the women he thought would stay invisible. I built something out of the worst night of my life that was larger and more lasting than anything he had planned. And when you ask me what I learned, and people do ask because this is the kind of story that makes people want a lesson, a takeaway, something they can carry here, is what I say. Trust is not weakness. Trusting the wrong person is not a character flaw. What happened to me was not my failure. It was his choice and her choice, and they made it deliberately, and they were held accountable for it. And the fact that it happened does not mean I was wrong to love. It means I was right to fight. That is the story. All of it. Every part. And I told it the way it happened, not softened, not rearranged, not made more comfortable than it was, because somewhere out there is a woman sitting in a beautiful room surrounded by roses, waiting for someone who told her he'd be right back, and she is hearing something through a wall that her gut already knows is wrong. This story is for her, so she knows exactly what to do. She reaches into her pocket, and she presses record.